Every day, every day, every day I write the book. I kind of blew that, didn't I? Chapter 25. Epigraph. If I exorcise these devils, my angels may leave too. And once they leave, they're so very hard to find. Tom Waits. When I got to the East Coast, I stayed with a friend from Boulder who now lived in Norwalk, Connecticut. I arrived with about $700. I needed to find a job and a place to live quickly. There was a job cooking in a chain restaurant in the Stamford, Connecticut newspaper when I applied. When I applied, I told the man who hired me that I was looking in Manhattan and I would quit as soon as I got a job there. He hired me anyway. He didn't seem to think finding a job in the city would be easy. That same day, I found a room in the YWCA in Stamford. I was a little north of my intended destination. It was autumn. There were piles of yellow leaves all over the streets. I forgot how beautiful autumn was on the East Coast. I'd forgotten how industrial and crowded the East Coast was. Even the gray-brownness of the industrial landscape was beautiful to me. It all seemed more real than the dream world of Boulder. On Thanksgiving, I went into the city to the Macy's parade. I was in the move of New York. Big floats, big balloons, big crowds. When I got back to the Y, my friend brought me a turkey dinner in a Pyrex container. I spent the evening sitting in the hall, drinking wine, smoking, and calling everybody in Boulder from a payphone. The restaurant I worked at was in a mall. Mall restaurants have a factory production attitude about food. Every day I assembled food from mixes in a small area in the back of the restaurant with 3 Haitian women who spoke in patois. I worked hard and fast and left every day feeling like a wind-up toy that had been wound down. I went to my little room in the Y, smoked cigarettes, and looked through the Voice and the Times for a job in New York. Generally, cooks are divided into prep and or production cooks and line cooks. The name suggests the tasks given to each. Prep cooks do most of the chopping and assembly. Line cooks do most of the cooking for service. Tasks do overlap, but there is a hierarchy that is reflected in each salary. A prep cook has the tension of how much he or she may have to get done on a given day, but they are often people with no other skills, and many speak little or no English. Because line cooks might have to interact with a waitress, they more often speak English. They also deal with more tension. A line cook needs to be able to move from first gear to fifth gear relative to how many customers arrive at any given time. Line cooks also support the chef's intention that they produce the food that the customer eats at the moment they want it. After a series of job interviews, I went for the one with the chef of an upscale deli, Donald Sachs. Donald's first restaurant was a small gourmet sandwich shop in Soho. I was applying at the newer, bigger restaurant in the courtyard of the newer, bigger World Financial Center. Rods of brass and copper standing 20 feet high delineated the restaurant area. There were 3 other restaurants, one in each corner of the courtyard. During lunch, the area filled up with the financial district power elite. The tables were green marbled, framed with mahogany. The floors were marble. You could look through a glass window and see the kitchen, which was full of new, shiny equipment. I was hired as a line cook. I found a small room in a residential hotel on the Upper West Side. It had taken 3 months, but now I lived in New York City. On my first New Year's Eve in New York City, I could see the tops of fireworks going off in Central Park from my window. The room was small. My bed was a mat on the floor. Directly below the window, I could see the corner of 103rd and Broadway. It all felt like living in a scene that I might have watched on a big screen. I liked to go to work early and stare at the Statue of Liberty. It looked like a bright green Coke bottle when it was lit up in the evening. I sat on the ledge by a big window smoking a cigarette beside a no smoking sign looking at the cityscape. At first, I would not take the subway after 9 p.m., and then 11, and then midnight. I looked around and saw a variety of people on the subway, even at midnight, many who were coming or going to work just like me. Eventually, I began to relax into the city. I knew where to get dinner for $6 in every neighborhood and in a variety of cuisines. In the Upper West Side where I lived, there was a Chinese place where I got noodles with peanut sauce and hot and sour soup. There was a deli with a wonderfully priced by the pound salad bar. On St. Mark's, there was a Mediterranean place with hummus, dolmas, baba ganoush, pita plate, and pizza by the slice. Mostly I ate at work. Mostly I smoked. The bathroom floor in my residential hotel room was so dirty that I regularly chose to wait till I got to Grand Central Station. I should say that bathroom was shared somehow. I don't know. I don't think I did that. The bathroom floor in my residential hotel was so dirty that I regularly chose to wait until I got to Grand Central Station to use the bathroom, where I spent most of the time alone. I'm goofing this up. To use the bathroom there. I spent most of my time alone. In Boulder, I could hardly walk down the street and not see someone I knew. In New York, I was anonymous. I could reinvent myself in every moment. The anonymity felt romantic, but I also wanted one place where I was known. I spent hours in a small bar on St. Mark's called Bananas. The decor was tropical funk, coconut shells and monkeys and palm trees. I pushed through the plastic vines at the entrance and head straight to the seat at the end of the bar, near where Shane washed the bar glasses. "You having a Corona then?" Shane asked. "Yep." "Why do you always drink that bridge and tunnel stuff?" he said, as he walked off to get my beer from the cooler. I soon switched to Rolling Rock, a switch that was ironic since in Pennsylvania, Rolling Rock was what the parents drank. Everywhere I went, there were codes, languages, label identification. So much to learn. Shane was an artist. He was from Australia and still spoke with a flat Aussie accent. He had long blonde hair, blue-green eyes, and a square chin. "Look here, you still living in that shitty hotel?" Shane asked. "Yeah, I haven't really been able to look around much." "Well, I need a roommate for a few months. What do you think?" I thought anything was better than the hotel. I moved out of the little room with the view of 103rd and Broadway. I moved away from the bathroom with the always dirty floor. I moved to Park Slope and the 2-bedroom flat filled with furniture that Shane found on the street. 3 months later, Shane moved back into Manhattan with a girlfriend. I found a small room in another residential hotel. This one had a bed, a dresser, and a little refrigerator, and my own bathroom off to the side. I found a singing teacher, Phil Oakes, from an ad in the Village Voice. He was an odd man who didn't play piano that well and relied on a stern, disapproving manner to coerce his students into following his plan. The technique he was teaching was one that he invented. He wanted me to hold my breath in different shapes, hold my mouth in different shapes while I sang. Somehow this was going to strengthen the muscles of my face and throat. "Push your lips forward, more, ooh, ooh, ooh. That's it. Now let's do it up the scale." He watched me through thick glasses rimmed in black plastic. He was behind the electric piano and I was on the other side. I pushed my lips as far forward as I could and went up the scale. Ooh, ooh, oohing. "Okay, now lips, flat, I went to Phil's apartment for my class every week, faithfully. Eventually, he asked me to join the Sunday evening group in which I would practice singing with a mic in front of others, all of which would prepare us for a showcase that Phil would organize and promote. He couldn't really play the blues, so the songs I worked in were more show tunes and standards. I stood in front of the mirror in my bathroom at the hotel and practiced oohing and ehing, and the mouth shapes and tones I learned from Phil. At each showcase, we sang 2 songs and then chatted with the audience for 3 minutes. The combination of his playing and preoccupation with technique made me tense on stage. It wasn't rock and roll. My singing was tight. I was actually more comfortable talking on stage than singing, and I was funny. It's something you learn when you're a fat kid. Make a joke before anyone else can, then maybe they'll leave you alone. Or if you're funny enough and you make them laugh enough, they may even be your friend. If you don't make the joke, you're just one of the kids who runs home, trying to get away from the boys who poke at your legs with sticks. You pile onto your bed, a lump. You squeeze into yourself and you cry. I knew how to be funny. People complimented my humor. No one said anything about my singing. Donald Sachs featured gourmet sandwiches, salads, and soups. The walk-in was redolent with bunches of fresh herbs. There was a lot to learn about ingredients alone. We served brie and Westphalian ham sandwiches on black bread, prosciutto and mozzarella on Italian bread. Every day I put the chickens to roast on the rotisserie. There were a variety of salads, tuna with lime and dill, wild rice, black bean salad, Chinese green bean. The food was referred to as American bistro. The Jamaican cook stood at the end of the counter chopping vegetables and assembling salads, chatting in thick and rhythmic patois. The Mexican cooks and dishwashers raced around chopping and cleaning. Most of them were from Mexico City, and their Spanish had the fast-clip quality of that region. The line cooks who worked in the service area on the other side of the thick glass made frantic gestures, pointing at empty containers, hoping that someone would have mercy on them and run to the walk-in for more of what they needed. I looked past them to the expansive marble floor where handsome waiters charmed the Wall Street lunchers. "Jump these for me," Nancy, the chef, extended one long, thin finger, pointing at the pile of chopped onions on her cutting board, looking down at her equally long, thin nose, nodding as if to confirm my acquiescence, and rushed off into the back kitchen. I wanted to acquiesce, but I had no idea what she wanted me to do. Jump onions? I'd heard of jumping people sexually or with intent to rob or mug. I'd even heard of being jumped into a gang. I'd never heard of jumping onions. I was still standing there with a deer in the headlight look when she sped past on her way to the dining room. "Don't let them get too brown." She must want me to saute them. Jumping must refer to the way they fly up in the air when the cooks flip them in the pan. Okay, I knew how to do that. It seemed that every day there was some elementary task that I knew how to do but failed to comprehend when it was requested. Nancy had asked me to get salt one day. I went to the dry storage and looked for a cylindrical container, possibly blue, with a picture of a girl and an umbrella. I saw nothing like that. At Donald Sachs, I would soon discover that in many fine restaurants they use kosher salt because it's less refined, dissolves better, and has subtler flavor. Kosher salt came in a tall red and yellow box, the kind of box I would have thought contained cereal. I failed at finding salt. I failed at finding fresh dill. I thought I knew what it looked like, but the long bushy branches in the walk-in eluded me. I failed at cutting onions. "I always know when you cut the onions," David said. Something about the curve of the right side of his lip and the arch of his eyebrow told me he wasn't giving me a compliment. Tentatively, I asked how he knew. "Because you make those half moons." I just stared at him. While Nancy could be imperious with the credibility of her Johnson & Wales culinary degree, informing everything she said, David had worked his way through the kitchens of Hawaii and now New York. His manner reflected a combination of his laid-back Maui youth and the puffed-up defensiveness he used to combat his own feelings of inadequacy. He reminded me of Paul and Danny. I was less miserable when I didn't know what he was talking about, but I still had the deer in the headlights look. He smiled, took the onion out of my hand, deftly sliced off both ends, cut the onion in half lengthwise, and sliced each half from side to side. Instead of half moons, the slices looked almost rectangular. Because my pride was taking a daily battering, I reacted with some defensiveness. What the fuck difference does it make how the onion was sliced? And yet, I would never cut an onion into half moons again. Nancy was the chef, David was the sous chef, Margaret was the dinner chef, and I was the fill-in on their days off chef. I worked at the branch shift on Saturday and Sunday, swing shift on Wednesday and Thursday, and dinner shift on Mondays. My days off were split, but I really didn't mind. Each shift had a feel. Days were busy, nights were mellow. We never had much of a dinner rush. There were fewer people in the kitchen. I rolled the tops for pot pies, made chili, bright with red, green, and yellow peppers, waited for pasta orders, and lusted after waiters. They weren't really waiters, they were actors. Each one making the fast bank that was only possible to make in carrying food or pouring drinks. They were funny, charming, and flirtatious. One by one, I developed crushes on each of them. The ebb and flow of my affection could be tracked by how much attention each individual one of them gave me. The quick one-line conversation between cooks and waiters are a great way to flirt. The waiter is on the run, pacing in order or grabbing food. If a cook says something aggressively flirtatious and the waiter doesn't want to respond, they can simply speed off to tend their customer. If the waiter is the one flirting and the cook seems unresponsive, the waiter can use the same need to speed off to save face. "Tish, this is a new guy. His name is Neil," said Dan. Dan was cute and charming and funny and married. His last name was Large, Dan Large. Every day I asked him to marry me because I wanted his last name. It was a joke that sent the whole kitchen into fits of laughter, so I employed it often. And to impress the new guy, who was very cute, I pulled it out again. "Let's ask Neil if you and I should be married. Neil, don't you think you should marry me?" I understand that he already has a wife. I'm only in it for the last name. He doesn't even have to kiss me. We can get divorced. I just want the name. I'm sure Neil was far too moral to agree with this scheme of yours. I'm sure Neil is far too moral to agree with this scheme of yours. Plus, he has his wife and I are friends, so watch out. Word may get back to her and you'll be in trouble. Oh, please, I'm not scared of her. I'm bigger. I'm larger than large. The name should be mine. Neil and I had work to do. We can't be hanging around back here with you and you pan jockeys. Does Neil have a voice? Through the ping-ponging frivolity of our game, Neil wore a wry smile, making him all the cuter. He looked at me from under the straight brown bangs that fell just below his eyebrows and grinned. Nope, Dan said, pushing Neil toward the door. We gotta go. Table 13 is ready to order. Neil, it would turn out, was not a waiter or an actor. He was a writer. He did have a voice, and he was clever, insightful, and charming. The minute he started working at Donald Sachs, my affection stopped wandering from waiter to waiter and focused on him. He was sweet and engaged and open. I loved Neil. Of all the men I have ever loved, he was the most present for all my frustration about not having my affection requited. He liked me, but he had a girlfriend. So there I was in a job where I would not advance, pining after a man whom I could not have, deciding it was time to move on. I decided it was time to move on. I answered an ad in the Village Voice that said, not much money, but learning in friendly environment. I needed to learn. Friendly was good, and maybe the money would come later. The ad was for the small restaurant in Chelsea called Miss Ruby's Cafe. Miss Ruby was the pseudonym for Ruth Adams Bronze. In my interview, she expressed surprise that anyone would answer such an ad. On my first day, I stood leaning against the pulled-down gate. A very tall, very fat man wearing a black t-shirt and baggy black pants, arms covered with tattoos, nose ring, 6 or 7 rings in each ear, the side of his head shaved, and a long braid down his back, came up and smiled, and I began to unlock the gate. I was almost scared. Hi, I'm Tish. Cool, I'm Clayton. He had the sweetest smile. We wandered into the restaurant, each of us assuming that the other was in charge. Suddenly, the door blew open, and in swept a young woman with short, spiky haircut and big, thick rimmed glasses. Hi, I'm Chris. We all looked at each other for a minute, and then I said, so how long have you worked here? This is my first day, Chris and Clayton said almost in unison. We started to laugh. Chris had never cooked anywhere before. Clayton and I had similar work histories. We stumbled around the kitchen trying to decide what to make. Eventually, 2 waiters came in, and the woman who said she was the manager wrote down what we were supposed to serve, and the restaurant opened. We were a great team. Ruth served American regional cuisine. Owing to her southern roots, we always served fried chicken, chicken fried steak, gumbo, and catfish. I was working for another southern woman, but this one rolled out the biscuit dough and cut it into perfect little circles. Every month, we featured food from a different part of the country. I loved it. I cooked weekends and 3 dinner shifts. Erratic hours again, but I liked the variety. I joined the Miss Ruby's crew during what would end up being the last year of the restaurant. There wasn't enough money to handle a lot of various serious problems that should have gotten the place closed. When I first got there, I heard about a snake. It would pop up from time to time in the napkin basket or the storage room. One night I leaned over to put a saute pan in the large pot of soapy water to soak. Coiled around the pot was the snake. I told the floor manager, who called New York's finest. 3 cars pulled up in front of the restaurant. 6 officers came in and used their enormous flashlights to find the snake, now coiled in a bus tub full of lids. They told us to call animal rescue and left. Later, protected with pot holders, one of the waiters and the manager caught the snake, and at the request of an overwrought animal rights activist waitress, took it to a park. It's unlikely the snake could have survived in the park since it was winter in New York. Apparently, the snake had been keeping our rat problem at bay. Now we were literally up to our ankles in them. Before I walked into the kitchen in the morning, I threw things from the dining room across the pass bar into the kitchen. Rats would scramble. I was trying to announce my presence, not that it mattered. I once saw a rat as large as a cat responding to my noise by slowly wobbling out from under the prep table and sauntering across the kitchen. As the day wore on, in the presence of As the day wore on, the presence of people sent most of the rats to the basement, but I did watch smaller and older ones run around the dining room. Bolder ones run around the dining room. Two gentlemen eating lunch during a quieter part of the day watched as a rat ran out under their table. They shrugged and went back to their conversation. And there were roaches. They fell from the ceiling onto the table where I was cooking. I flicked them away and kept chopping. One evening, a roach fell onto a plate just as a waiter set it in front of a woman. She was not as blithe as the two young men. I called Miss Ruby's the Wild Kingdom. Ruth seemed entirely unable to cope with all these invasions. She grimaced at each story, but never called an exterminator. I can only assume she could not afford one. My need to be part of something was sated by Ruth's largesse. She had published a cookbook. Menu meetings with her were a combination of history lesson and food description. She celebrated her 50th birthday when I was working at the cafe. I took her to lunch at La Bernardin, an upscale French restaurant in Midtown that featured seafood. Lunch was a prefix at $50 each, a price that I could barely afford. Ruth drank Maker's Mark. We stopped at a bar to have a drink before lunch. The bar had a mural of a horse race painted around the top of the room. It felt both decadent and sophisticated to be there drinking before noon. We arrived at La Bernardin mellowed by bourbon. There was a large dining room filled with men and women in business suits. Large paintings hung up on the walls, courtesy of the Museum of Art. On the advice of the chef at Miss Ruby's, I ordered the skate, but I had never eaten skate. When the fish arrived, I saw a fan-shaped figure on my plate. I began to saw into it, and the waiter, in the most gracious manner, took my fork and demonstrated how to scrape the fish from the bone, pull out the skeleton and eat the other side. Our wine glasses were always half full, no matter how much we drank. Someone in the restaurant recognized Ruth and sent us a second bottle of wine. For dessert, she ordered a caramel sampler plate on which sat 4 tiny different caramel tarts and custards. A cage of spun caramel sat over them. Ruth tapped it with her spoon and giggled. We took a cab back to Chelsea, and as we passed Times Square, the words "Happy Birthday" were on the ticker tape. It was a charming synchronicity, and we both giggled. Working with Ruth felt epic. The James Beard House hosted a dinner once a month featuring local chefs. They asked Ruth to be a guest chef. I got to go along and help. I was cooking in the same kitchen that James Beard had cooked in, and at one point a bunch of pans fell. A man who worked for James told me that the house was still haunted by the chef. If pans fell, that was James giving us his blessing. New York was a lover, and I was always in hot pursuit. I wanted magic. I wanted to get swept up in a storyline. I wanted the one thing that leads to another, happy ever after stuff that makes a movie of the week. I wanted fame. I wanted to be the fat girl who lived happily ever after, and I was definitely not the fattest person in New York. While I was there, She-Devil with Roseanne Barr was in the theaters. I could see the posters in subway stations and try to hope that if the culture could hold a fat actress, maybe there was room for a fat rock and roll singer. But Roseanne was a comedian. I was trying to sing love songs. I decided to join a gym as a way of working off the stress of the city, or that's what I told myself. The truth was I wanted to maintain this surprise weight loss and maybe lose more. I spent 15 minutes on the stationary bike and 15 minutes on the Stairmaster, followed by a half hour of weights. I loved the feeling of my developing muscles. I was very strong. It was a different experience of my body. Mirrors surrounded me when I was at the gym. I wasn't always able to concentrate. I saw myself in the mirror and I began mental surgery, slicing off the parts of my body that were not beautiful to me. I felt like I would never be flat enough. It requires effort for me to be physical. Perhaps this is because I had a childhood lived in books and dreams. Perhaps I am just not a physical person. I wanted to concentrate on the value of experiencing my body in motion, but the illusion of thinness became the cure for all the problems in my life, frustrated at that effort. Let me read that again. I wanted to concentrate on the value of experiencing my body in motion, but the illusion of thinness being the cure for all the problems in my life frustrated that effort. I was losing weight, but not much. I would get caught up in a negative emotional cycle in which nothing I did was good enough. I would leave the gym angry. I was walking from the gym to work one day, and a fellow said, "You're looking strong today." Strong, not thin. I was too shy to go to the clubs on open mic night and sing, but I wouldn't admit that to myself. I was working in kitchens where I learned about food, but I wasn't making any money. I was preoccupied with just being in New York. Just being there was like a grand project. It was seductive, but I never really focused my intentions. After 2 years, I was still living in the room of the residential hotel, not singing the music I wanted to sing, and moving from job to job. I didn't feel strong. Being in New York did catalyze a certain kind of growth for me. I was making a life in a place that scared me so much. And yet, I wasn't really going for it.